Philadelphia, June 15, 1947. 18-year-old Grace Kelly was cleaning out her late grandmother's attic when she found a dusty box labeled Grace Birth Records. Curious, she opened it expecting to find her baby photos and hospital certificates. Instead, she found documents that shattered everything she believed about her identity. The birth certificate inside wasn't hers. It belonged to a baby girl named Grace Patricia Brennan, born on November 12, 1929, the same day Grace had always celebrated as her birthday. But this baby had been born to Margaret Brennan, an unmarried Irish immigrant who worked as a maid for wealthy Philadelphia families. Grace stared at the documents in confusion. Who was Grace Brennan, and why did her grandmother have this stranger's birth certificate? Then Grace found the second document that changed everything. Adoption papers dated December 1929, transferring custody of baby Grace Brennan to John and Margaret Kelly. Grace Kelly wasn't a Kelly at all. She was Grace Brennan, the daughter of a poor Irish maid who had been forced to give up her child to the wealthy family she worked for. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery waiting in her grandmother's attic, because Grace was about to learn that her real mother hadn't died in childbirth like she'd been told. Margaret Brennan was still alive, still working as a maid, and had been watching Grace from the shadows her entire life. The woman Grace Kelly thought was her mother had been living a lie for 18 years, and the woman who had actually given birth to her had been hiding in plain sight, working in the Kelly household every single day. To understand how this extraordinary deception began, you need to go back to 1928, when 20-year-old Margaret Brennan arrived in Philadelphia from County Cork, Ireland. Margaret was beautiful, intelligent, and desperately poor. Like thousands of Irish immigrants, she had come to America seeking a better life. She found work as a maid with the Kelly family, one of Philadelphia's most prominent Catholic families. John B. Kelly Sr. was a successful contractor and Olympic rowing champion. His wife, Margaret Kelly, was a former model from Germany who had married into Philadelphia high society. They lived in a mansion in the prestigious Germantown section of the city. Margaret Brennan worked hard and impressed the Kelly family with her dedication and intelligence, but in the summer of 1928, something happened that would change all their lives forever. Margaret Brennan became pregnant. The father was not her boyfriend or a young man from the Irish community. The father was someone much more complicated, someone whose identity would remain a carefully guarded secret for the rest of Margaret's life. When Margaret told the Kelly family about her pregnancy in early 1929, she expected to be fired immediately. Unmarried pregnant servants were typically dismissed without references, left to fend for themselves on the streets. Instead, Margaret Kelly made an unexpected proposal. "Margaret," she said, using the formal tone she always employed with servants, "my husband and I have been trying to have children for 3 years without success. The doctors say it may never happen for us naturally." Margaret Brennan listened in confusion. She didn't understand where this conversation was heading. "I want to make you an offer," Margaret Kelly continued. "You can stay here during your pregnancy. We'll provide medical care and support. And when the baby is born, we'd like to adopt the child as our own." Margaret Brennan was shocked. "Ma'am, I don't understand." "We'll raise the child as a Kelly," Margaret Kelly explained. "Give him or her every advantage, the best education, social position, unlimited opportunities. In return, you would continue working for our family and help care for the child, but as an employee, not as the mother." The offer was both generous and heartbreaking. Margaret Brennan could keep her job and stay close to her child, but she would have to pretend to be a stranger to her own baby. "What if I refuse?" Margaret asked. Margaret Kelly's expression hardened. "Then you'll be dismissed immediately with no references. You'll have no way to support yourself or your child. The baby would likely end up in an orphanage." Margaret Brennan understood that this wasn't really an offer. It was an ultimatum. Give up her child to the Kelly family or lose everything. She accepted the arrangement. On November 12, 1929, Margaret Brennan gave birth to a healthy baby girl at Philadelphia General Hospital. The birth certificate listed the mother as Margaret Brennan, but within hours, adoption papers had been signed transferring custody to John and Margaret Kelly. The baby was renamed Grace Patricia Kelly. Margaret Brennan returned to work for the Kelly family just 3 weeks after giving birth. Every day she watched the Kellys raise her daughter as their own. Every day she had to pretend that the baby she had carried for 9 months was just another member of the household she was paid to serve. The deception was emotionally devastating for Margaret, but she endured it because she believed it was best for her child. Grace grew up in luxury, attending the finest private schools, taking ballet and piano lessons, traveling to Europe, enjoying every privilege that wealth and social position could provide. Margaret Brennan remained in the Kelly household as a trusted servant, watching her daughter grow up from a distance, never able to reveal the truth about their relationship. Grace called her Maggie, and treated her with the casual friendliness that wealthy children typically showed to longtime household staff. Margaret cherished these interactions, even though Grace had no idea she was talking to a real mother. The secret arrangement worked for years because everyone involved had powerful reasons to maintain it. The Kelly family got the child they desperately wanted, Margaret Brennan got to stay close to her daughter and ensure her welfare, and Grace got opportunities that would have been impossible if she had remained Grace Brennan, daughter of an Irish maid. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, especially when they involve love as powerful as a mother's love for her child. As Grace grew older, Margaret began to notice disturbing patterns in how the Kelly family treated her daughter. John B. Kelly Sr. was demanding and critical, never satisfied with Grace's achievements. He pushed her relentlessly in athletics, academics, and social activities, always wanting more. Margaret Kelly was cold and emotionally distant, treating Grace more like a project than a beloved daughter. She criticized Grace's appearance, her mannerisms, her choices, as if she were polishing a prized possession rather than nurturing a child. Margaret Brennan watched her daughter struggle with feelings of inadequacy and desperation to please parents who seemed impossible to satisfy. She began to realize that while the Kelly family had given Grace material advantages, they weren't giving her the one thing every child needs most: unconditional love. Margaret wanted to comfort her daughter, to tell her she was perfect exactly as she was, to give her the maternal warmth she craved, but she couldn't, because she was just Maggie the maid. The situation became more painful as Grace entered her teenage years and began talking about her dreams of becoming an actress. "I want to go to New York and try acting," Grace told Margaret one afternoon while Margaret was cleaning Grace's bedroom. "But Mother and Father think it's ridiculous. They say I'm not talented enough, not beautiful enough, not special enough." Margaret's heart broke hearing her daughter speak this way. Grace Kelly was extraordinarily talented, breathtakingly beautiful, and incredibly special. Margaret knew this because she was Grace's mother, and she could see qualities in her daughter that the Kellys were blind to. "You shouldn't listen to them, Miss Grace," Margaret said carefully. "You're more talented than they realize." Grace looked up with surprise. Household staff rarely offered personal opinions about family matters. "Do you really think so, Maggie?" Margaret wanted to say. "You're my daughter, and you're the most amazing person I've ever known. You can achieve anything you set your mind to because you have strength and determination that comes from overcoming challenges most people never face." Instead, she said, "I think you should follow your dreams, Miss Grace. You might surprise everyone." This conversation convinced Margaret that it was time to tell Grace the truth about her identity. Margaret had kept the secret for 18 years, but watching her daughter struggle with self-doubt and family criticism was becoming unbearable. Grace had a right to know who her real mother was, especially if she was going to leave Philadelphia to pursue her dreams. Margaret decided that she would reveal the truth on Grace's 18th birthday, November 12, 1947. But Grace discovered the secret herself 6 months early, when she found the adoption papers in her grandmother's attic. Grace sat on the dusty attic floor for over an hour, reading and rereading the documents that proved she was Grace Brennan, not Grace Kelly. Everything suddenly made sense. Why she never felt like she truly belonged in the Kelly family, why her parents seemed so critical and distant, why she had always felt more comfortable with the household staff than with her supposed relatives. But the revelation that shocked Grace most was realizing that her real mother had been living in the same house for her entire life. Maggie wasn't just the family maid, Maggie was her mother. Grace ran downstairs and found Margaret in the kitchen, preparing dinner as she had every evening for 18 years. "Maggie," Grace said quietly, "we need to talk." Margaret looked up and saw Grace holding the adoption papers. Her face went pale. "Oh, Grace," Margaret whispered, "you found them." "You're my mother," Grace said, her voice breaking. "You're my real mother, and you never told me." Margaret began crying, 18 years of suppressed emotion finally pouring out. "I wanted to tell you every day," Margaret said. "Every single day for 18 years I wanted to hold you and tell you the truth, but I thought this was better for you. I thought being a Kelly would give you opportunities that being a Brennan never could." Grace dropped the papers and embraced the woman who had given birth to her, raised her from a distance, and loved her in secret for 18 years. "Why did you give me up?" Grace asked through her tears. Margaret told Grace everything: the pregnancy, the ultimatum from the Kelly family, the impossible choice between keeping her child and ensuring her child's future. "I never gave you up in my heart," Margaret said. "I just gave you up legally so you could have a better life than I ever could have provided." Grace understood that Margaret's decision had been an act of love, not abandonment. She had sacrificed her own happiness to give her daughter opportunities that would have been impossible otherwise. "What happens now?" Grace asked. Margaret wiped her tears. "That's up to you, Grace. You're 18 now. You can choose your own path." Grace made a decision that would define the rest of her life. "I choose you," she said. "I choose my real mother." Grace and Margaret decided to keep the secret from the Kelly family for the time being, but they began building the mother-daughter relationship they had been denied for 18 years. They started meeting privately in Margaret's room after the Kelly family went to sleep, talking for hours about Grace's childhood, her dreams, her fears, and her plans for the future. These secret conversations became the most precious part of both their lives. Grace would slip quietly down to Margaret's room in the servants' quarters after midnight, and they would sit together on Margaret's small bed, talking until dawn. "Tell me about when I was a baby," Grace would ask, hungry for the maternal stories she had never heard. Margaret would describe every detail she could remember: how Grace had been born with a full head of dark hair, how she had been a calm baby who rarely cried, how her first word had been "Mama," spoken to Margaret Kelly, not to her real mother. "It broke my heart every time you called her Mama," Margaret admitted, "but I was also proud that you were learning to speak so early. I knew you were going to be special." Grace learned that Margaret had kept a secret diary throughout her childhood, recording every milestone, every achievement, every moment of growth. "I wrote it all down," Margaret said, showing Grace a worn leather journal. "Your first steps, your first day of school, your first ballet recital. I couldn't be your mother officially, but I could remember everything as if I was." Grace read entry after entry of her real mother's observations. "Grace is 3 today. She performed a little dance for the family at dinner. Her natural grace is extraordinary. It's like she was born to move beautifully. Grace asked me today why I always smile when I see her. I told her it's because she brings sunshine to every room. If only she knew how true that is." Grace cried today because Mrs. Kelly criticized her piano playing. "I wanted to hold her and tell her she's perfect, but I could only offer her a glass of milk and a kind word. It's the hardest thing I've ever done." Margaret had also collected small mementos over the years: a lock of Grace's hair from her first haircut, drawings Grace had made as a child, report cards that showed her excellent grades. "I kept everything I could," Margaret explained. "It was my way of being your mother even when I couldn't act like it." Grace discovered that Margaret had made enormous personal sacrifices to stay close to her. She had never married, never had other children, never built a life of her own because she couldn't bear to leave Grace. "Didn't you ever want your own family?" Grace asked. "You were my family," Margaret replied simply. "Watching you grow up, even from a distance, was enough for me." Grace also learned about the financial arrangements that had made her privileged upbringing possible. Margaret had not only given up her child, she had also given up her wages for the first 10 years to help pay for Grace's education and activities. "The Kellys paid for your school and lessons," Margaret explained, "but I contributed everything I earned to make sure you had extra opportunities. Music lessons, dance classes, summer trips. I wanted you to have everything." This revelation devastated Grace. Her real mother had worked without pay for 10 years, living in a tiny servant's room, wearing the same few dresses, eating simple meals, all so that Grace could have piano lessons and pretty clothes. "Why didn't you tell me?" Grace asked through tears. "Because you were a child, and children should never have to worry about money or sacrifice. That's what mothers are for." Grace began to understand the depth of Margaret's love and the magnitude of her sacrifice. Margaret had given up not just her child, but her entire life to ensure Grace's happiness and success. As they spent more time together, Grace and Margaret discovered they shared many traits that had nothing to do with the Kelly family. They both had the same laugh, the same way of tilting their heads when they were thinking, the same love for Irish music and poetry. Margaret taught Grace traditional Irish songs that her own mother had taught her. Grace learned about her real heritage, the Brennan family's long history in County Cork, the struggles they had faced during the Irish potato famine, the courage that had brought Margaret to America. "You come from strong women," Margaret told Grace. "Women who never gave up. No matter how hard life became, that strength is in your blood." Grace also learned about her biological father's identity, a secret Margaret had kept for 18 years. "He was a good man," Margaret said carefully. "Someone who cared about both of us but was in an impossible situation. He helped arrange for the Kellys to adopt you because he wanted you to have opportunities he couldn't provide." Margaret never revealed his name, but Grace understood that he had been someone from Philadelphia high society, possibly someone the Kelly family knew well. This knowledge helped Grace understand why the adoption arrangement had been so carefully orchestrated and why everyone involved had such powerful reasons to keep the secret. The most emotional moment in their developing relationship came when Margaret showed Grace a letter she had written on the day of Grace's birth but never sent. "My dearest Grace," the letter read, "today you were born, and my heart broke and soared at the same time. I have to give you to another family so you can have the life you deserve, but I want you to know that you are loved completely and unconditionally. Every breath you take, every step you make, every dream you chase, your real mother will be watching and cheering for you. I may never be able to hold you again, but you will be in my heart forever. Love always, your mother Margaret." Grace wept as she read the letter, understanding for the first time the pain her mother had endured to give her a better life. Margaret shared stories about her own life in Ireland, her journey to America, and the 18 years she had spent watching her daughter grow up while pretending to be a stranger. Grace learned about her Irish heritage, her real family history, and the strength that had been passed down through generations of Brennan women. These conversations gave Grace a sense of identity and belonging that she had never experienced with the Kelly family. For the first time in her life, she felt truly loved and accepted for who she was, not who she was expected to be. Margaret encouraged Grace's dreams of becoming an actress, something the Kelly family had always discouraged. "You have talent, Grace," Margaret said. "But more than that, you have soul. You understand what it means to struggle, to sacrifice, to love deeply. That's what makes a great actress." In September 1947, Grace left Philadelphia for New York to pursue her acting career, but she wasn't leaving as Grace Kelly, the privileged daughter of a wealthy family. She was leaving as Grace Brennan, the daughter of a strong Irish woman who had given her everything, including the courage to chase her dreams. Margaret helped Grace prepare for her new life, sharing practical advice about surviving in a big city and emotional wisdom about staying true to herself. "Remember who you really are," Margaret told Grace on the night before she left for New York. "You're not just Grace Kelly the rich girl, you're Grace Brennan, and you come from a long line of Irish women who never gave up on their dreams." Grace's success in Hollywood took on new meaning once she knew her true identity. Every role she won, every accolade she received was a victory not just for herself but for her real mother, who had sacrificed everything to make Grace's dreams possible. Grace stayed in contact with Margaret throughout her career, writing letters and making secret phone calls to share her experiences and seek advice. When Grace won the Academy Award for Best Actress in 1955, she dedicated the award privately to "the woman who gave me life and the courage to pursue my dreams." Margaret watched the Academy Awards ceremony on television from the Kelly family kitchen, tears streaming down her face as she saw her daughter accept the highest honor in her profession. The secret of Grace's true identity remained hidden until after Margaret Brennan's death in 1963. Only then did Grace feel free to share the story of her real mother with a few close friends. Grace's decision to marry Prince Rainier and give up her acting career was influenced by her understanding of sacrifice. She had learned from Margaret that sometimes love requires giving up what you want most for the benefit of someone else. Grace Kelly died in 1982, but she was buried not just as a princess and movie star, but as Grace Brennan, daughter of a brave Irish woman who had loved her enough to let her go. In her private papers found after her death, Grace had written, "I am who I am because of two mothers, the one who gave me opportunities and the one who gave me love. Margaret Kelly made me a Kelly, but Margaret Brennan made me myself." The story of Grace Kelly's adoption reveals the complicated nature of family, identity, and belonging. It shows that love sometimes requires sacrifice so profound that it remains hidden for decades. Margaret Brennan never got credit for raising one of the most beloved actresses and princesses in history, but she had something more valuable than recognition. She had the knowledge that her daughter had lived an extraordinary life because of the impossible choice she had made on a cold December day in 1929. Grace Kelly's elegance, strength, and grace under pressure all came from the Irish maid who loved her daughter enough to watch her grow up from the shadows, never claiming credit, never seeking recognition, but always, always loving her with the fierce devotion that only a mother can provide. The woman the world knew as Grace Kelly was actually Grace Brennan, daughter of a hero whose name most people never learned. And perhaps that's the most beautiful part of this story. The greatest love often goes unrecognized but never unfelt. If this story moved you, share it with others who understand that family is defined by love, not just by law. Hit that subscribe button, and let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Margaret Brennan's situation? Don't miss our next video where we reveal other shocking adoption secrets that changed Hollywood history. Stories of sacrifice, love, and the families we choose versus the families we're born into. Remember, the most powerful love stories are often about mothers who love their children enough to let them go, and children who grow up to understand the depth of that sacrifice.